Growing up, I always knew I was the disappointment. It wasn't a suspicion or a feeling I couldn't quite shake. It was something my parents made painfully clear over and over again. My older brother, Eric, was their golden child. Smart, disciplined, top of his class, never stepped out of line. He was the kind of son my parents could brag about, the one they proudly introduced to coworkers and family friends. Meanwhile, I was the opposite. I struggled in school, procrastinated until the last possible second, forgot deadlines, lost assignments, zoned out in the middle of conversations. I wasn't dumb, I knew that much. I just couldn't function the way other kids did, the way my parents expected me to. At first, I thought I was just lazy. I tried to push myself, to focus harder, to just apply myself, the way my mom always said. It never worked, and my parents never tried to understand. Why can't you be more like Eric? That was a favorite. So was, you'll never make it in the real world if you don't get your act together. My dad, always the blunt one, made it even clearer. You're going to end up as some pathetic loser living in our basement at 30. Eric didn't even have to say anything. He just looked at me like I was beneath him, like I wasn't even worth the air I breathed. I stopped expecting support. I remember my 16th birthday vividly. Not because it was special, but because it wasn't. Eric had these massive birthday parties every year. Big, expensive events with all his friends, fancy decorations, catered food. He got brand new laptops, high-end watches, once even a trip to Europe. For me, it was a grocery store cake with my name spelled wrong, a single book about how to improve your study habits, and a quick, distracted happy birthday from my mom before she rushed off to help Eric with something actually important. I wasn't surprised. By the time high school rolled around, I was barely scraping by. I wasn't failing, but I wasn't excelling either. My parents had already written me off. Then Eric got into one of the top universities in the country. They never shut up about it. Every conversation at the dinner table, every call with relatives, Eric, Eric, Eric. Then, 2 years later, it was my turn. I didn't get into an Ivy League school. Hell, I didn't even apply. I knew better. Instead, I was accepted into a decent but unremarkable state university. I remember the exact moment I told my dad. He barely looked up from his laptop. "That's it," he said. My mom pursed her lips, exchanging a glance with him. "Well, I guess it's something." Eric smirked. "I mean, at least he got in somewhere." I clenched my fists under the table. I knew what they were thinking. We wasted our time on him. He's never going to amount to anything. Then my dad sighed and shut his laptop. "Look, Liam, I just want to be honest with you. I don't have high hopes for you anymore. I think we all just need to accept that." Silence. I felt my chest tighten, like the air had been knocked out of me. He kept going, casual as ever. "Honestly, I think it's time we stop pretending. You're a grown man now. If you're going to college, you're doing it on your own. We're not paying for some second-rate school." I swallowed hard. "But you paid for Eric's seat." "Eric earned it," he snapped. "You? I don't even know what you're doing with your life." That was it. That was the moment I decided I was done. That night, I packed my bags. I didn't even say goodbye. I moved into a cramped dorm, took out student loans, got a part-time job to afford food and rent. It was brutal. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made a mistake. If maybe I should have stayed, kept trying to make them proud. Then, one day, everything changed. I was scrolling through some random articles online when I stumbled across something about ADHD. I started reading, then kept reading, then kept reading. The symptoms? Chronic procrastination, forgetfulness, trouble focusing, zoning out in conversations, feeling overwhelmed by simple tasks. My entire life written out in perfect detail. I got tested a few months later. The results were obvious. The doctor looked at me like he couldn't believe no one had caught it sooner. It was like something finally clicked in my brain. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't broken. My brain just worked differently. With the right tools, medication, therapy, structure, I figured out how to function, how to actually succeed. I graduated, got a job, worked my way up. 9 years later, I was an AI solutions architect in Seattle, making more money than I ever thought possible. I had an apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, a career I was proud of. And, most importantly, I had Nate. Nate, who had been there through every breakdown, every late-night spiral of self-doubt, who never once made me feel like I wasn't enough. For 9 years, I had zero contact with my family. No calls, no messages, nothing. Then, One day, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in almost a decade. It was my grandfather. I hesitated before answering. "Hey, Grandpa." "Liam," he said, his voice rough with age. "It's been a long time, kid." I swallowed. "Yeah, it has." "I won't waste your time," he continued. "I'm turning 80 next week. Big party, whole family's coming. And I'd really like to see you there." I tensed at that. The whole family. Meaning my parents. Meaning Eric. "I don't know, Grandpa," I admitted. He sighed. "I get it. I do. But I'd hate to celebrate without you." I rubbed my temple. "I'll think about it." "Liam," he said gently. "Please." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. This man had always been good to me. He never played favorites. Never made me feel like I was less. And now, he was asking for this one thing. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll be there." I had no idea what I was walking into. The night before the party, I barely slept. I kept telling myself it was just one night. A few hours, a couple of polite conversations, maybe a drink or two, and then I could leave. Easy. Except it wasn't. Because no matter how much time had passed, some part of me still felt like that kid sitting at the dinner table, waiting for my parents to acknowledge me, to see me. And I hated that. Nate noticed. He sat next to me on the couch, his fingers threading through my hair, slow and deliberate. "You're spiraling," he murmured. I sighed. "I know." He hesitated. "Are you sure you want to do this?" "No." But I said, "Yeah." "I owe Grandpa." Nate studied me for a long moment. "Do you want me to come with you?" I considered it. Having him there would make everything easier. A buffer. A reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. But this was something I needed to face myself. I forced a small smile. "I'll be fine." He didn't look convinced. "Just don't let them get inside your head," he said. "You don't owe them anything, Liam." I nodded, even though some part of me still felt like I did. The next afternoon, I drove to Chicago, my stomach twisting the closer I got to the venue. It was a high-end event space, the kind my parents loved to throw parties in: polished floors, crystal chandeliers, waitstaff in black and white. I stepped inside, and for a second, I just stood there. The smell of expensive cologne, the murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, it was all so familiar. Then, I spotted him. Grandpa sat at a table near the center of the room, laughing with a group of old friends. His silver hair was neatly combed back, his face a little more lined than I remembered, but his smile? The same as ever. When he turned and saw me, his eyes lit up. "Liam," he called, waving me over. A few heads turned. I ignored them. I crossed the room, and the second I reached him, he pulled me into a tight hug. "Thought maybe you'd change your mind," he admitted. "Almost did," I said honestly. He chuckled, patting my back. "Well, I'm glad you didn't." Some of my cousins were there, too: Sarah, Jake, Maya. Their reactions were mixed. Sarah grinned. "Holy shit, it's been forever." She pulled me into a hug before I could react. "I didn't think we'd ever see you again." Maya gave me an awkward smile. "Yeah, welcome back, I guess." Jake looked between me and our grandfather. "Not gonna lie, I thought you were, like, in witness protection or something." I snorted. "Not quite." The conversation started flowing, easier than I expected. Some relatives were genuinely happy to see me. Others threw uncertain glances my way, clearly confused about my presence. I could feel the whispers before I even saw them. My parents. I turned my head, and there they were, standing near the bar, frozen in place. Mom looked like she'd seen a ghost. Dad's expression was unreadable, but I could see the tension in his jaw. The way he gripped his drink just a little too tight. And then there was Eric. Still the golden child, standing tall in his perfectly tailored suit, arms crossed over his chest. He was staring at me like I was some embarrassment that had just walked in off the street. For a second, no one moved. Then Dad started walking toward me. Of course. I barely had time to brace myself before he was in front of me, his face carefully neutral. "Liam," he said. A word, not a request. I glanced at Grandpa, who gave me a small nod, then followed Dad to a quieter corner of the room. The second we were alone, his expression shifted. "What are you doing here?" I exhaled sharply. "Grandpa invited me." He shook his head. "After all these years, you just show up?" I folded my arms. Why wouldn't I? He wanted me here. He let out a breath through his nose, slow and controlled. "You should have given us a heads up." I almost laughed. "Why?" "So you could come up with a better excuse for why your failure of a son is still breathing." His jaw twitched. Before he could respond, Mom appeared, her posture stiff, her voice tight. "This is ridiculous." Why are you doing this, Liam? Trying to cause problems? I'm causing problems? I repeated, incredulous. I came to celebrate Grandpa's birthday. You're the ones acting like I crashed a goddamn funeral. She scoffed. You cut us off. You walked away from this family. So why now? I clenched my fists. Because he's my grandfather. And unlike you, he actually gave a damn about me. Her lips parted slightly, like she was about to deny it, but she didn't. Then Eric stepped forward, his smirk as smug as ever. Well, this is entertaining, he drawled. The long-lost disappointment returns. Tell me, Liam, did you come back to beg for forgiveness? I felt something inside me snap. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Forgiveness? For what, exactly? For walking out on our family, he said smoothly. For embarrassing Mom and Dad. For ruining their reputation with your pathetic little sob story. I took a slow breath. I had spent years imagining what I'd say if I ever saw them again. The perfect speech, the perfect clapback. But standing here now, I realized I didn't need to prove anything to them. I smiled, shaking my head. You know what, Eric? I don't care what you think. He blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. For years, I let you and Mom and Dad control how I saw myself. I let your words define me. But not anymore. Dad scoffed. So now you think you're better than us? I met his gaze, steady. I don't think I'm better. I know I am. His face darkened. You should leave. I smirked. Why? Because you don't want people to know I exist. I leaned in slightly. Hate to break it to you, Dad, but I'm not going anywhere. With that, I turned and walked away, feeling lighter than I had in years. I walked away, heart still pounding, but I refused to let them see it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't backing down. I made my way back into the crowd, forcing my shoulders to relax. People were still laughing, still drinking, but I could feel the shift. Some relatives glanced at me, whispered to each other. The tension was thick, humming just beneath the surface. Good. Let them talk. At least now they knew the truth. I grabbed a drink from a passing waiter and found a quiet spot near the balcony. I needed air. The cool breeze hit my face the second I stepped outside, and I exhaled slowly. The city lights stretched out in front of me, glittering against the dark sky. I should have felt relieved, maybe even satisfied, but instead, there was this dull ache in my chest. Not regret. Not exactly. Just the weight of everything that had led to this moment. You really think you won? I didn't even have to turn around. Eric. I sighed, rubbing my temple. Jesus. Do you ever get tired? He leaned against the railing beside me, drink in hand. Of what? Being an insufferable prick. He let out a short laugh. Oh, come on. You can't be that surprised. I finally turned to look at him. No, I'm not. That's the sad part. He smirked, but it was different now, more forced, like he was trying to convince himself he still had the upper hand. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? He asked. Enjoying what? Making Mom and Dad look bad, he said smoothly. Showing up after all these years, playing the victim. Acting like you're better than us now. I exhaled sharply, already done with this conversation. I don't have to act. I am better than you. His jaw tightened, just slightly. You've really convinced yourself of that, huh? He muttered. Bet you're some self-made success story. I took a slow sip of my drink. It's not a story, Eric. It's reality. He scoffed. Right. And what exactly do you even do now? I smiled. He had no idea. I work in AI development, I said. I make more money than both of our parents combined. That wiped the smirk off his face. For the first time, he actually looked surprised. I let that sit for a second before continuing. I live in Seattle. Got my own place. And I have a partner who actually gives a damn about me. Unlike this family. He blinked, his fingers tightening around his glass. He cut himself off, shaking his head like he didn't want to believe it. I laughed. You can pretend all you want, Eric, but it's the truth. His expression shifted, something darker creeping in. Not anger. Jealousy. For so long, he had been the best. The one they adored. The one who did everything right. And now here I was, proving that I didn't need any of them to become something. That I had done just fine on my own. Must be nice, he said finally, voice quieter. Running away from all your problems. Pretending none of this matters. I frowned. You think I ran away? Didn't you? He gestured vaguely. You left. You cut everyone off. You never looked back. Sounds like running away to me. I stared at him for a long moment. Then, I shook my head. No, Eric. You stayed. His brow furrowed. What? You stayed. You kept playing their game. Kept chasing their approval, even when you knew it was impossible. I tilted my head slightly. So tell me, how's that working out for you? His face darkened, but he didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. Eric might have been the golden child, but he had never been good enough either. Not really. Mom and Dad had set expectations so impossibly high that no one could reach them. Not even him. He had spent his whole life trying. I had just been the first one to realize it wasn't worth it. After a long silence, he let out a bitter chuckle. You really think you're better than us? No, I said simply. I just finally stopped caring what you think. His jaw clenched. He didn't say another word. I turned back to the skyline, the city stretching endlessly in front of me. The world was so much bigger than this family. I had already won. I left Eric standing there, staring at the city like it held the answers to questions he didn't want to ask. I wasn't going to waste another second on him. Walking back inside, I felt lighter. Not because I had won anything. This wasn't a game. But because, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself to them anymore. I had already proved it to myself. I weaved through the party, past relatives who were still eyeing me like some long-lost myth. Some of them looked impressed. Others looked uncomfortable, like they were realizing they'd been fed a lie for years. Good. I made my way back to my grandfather, who had been watching the whole thing from across the room. The second I sat down, he chuckled. You really stirred up a hornet's nest tonight, kid. I smirked, taking a sip of my drink. Yeah, well, about time. He nodded approvingly, but his eyes softened. I'm proud of you, Liam. You've come a long way. That hit harder than I expected. I cleared my throat, looking away. Thanks, Grandpa. He patted my shoulder, then glanced toward the other side of the room. I followed his gaze and felt my stomach twist. My mother was standing near the entrance, her posture stiff, fingers gripping the strap of her purse. She wasn't looking at me, not yet. But she was waiting. I sighed. You think I should talk to her? Grandpa didn't answer right away. I think you should do whatever gives you peace. That was the thing. I didn't know what would. After a moment, I stood. I'll be back. I crossed the room, stopping a few feet in front of her. She looked up then, lips parting slightly. Liam, she said. I raised an eyebrow. Mom. She hesitated, glancing around. She wasn't comfortable. She had probably rehearsed this conversation in her head a dozen times, and now that it was happening, she didn't know where to start. Finally, she exhaled and said, May we talk? Privately. I could have said no. I could have walked away, just like they had. But I nodded. We stepped into a quieter hallway, away from the noise of the party. She stood there for a moment, wringing her hands like she was nervous. It was weird, seeing her like this. For so long, she had been unshakable, always in control. Now, she just looked lost. She swallowed hard. You look well. I huffed a short laugh. Yeah, I am. A beat of silence. Then, finally, she said, I don't know what you want me to say. I tilted my head. That's funny. I spent years wanting you to say anything. She winced. Liam, do you even realize what you did to me? My voice was quieter now, but sharper. You and Dad didn't just let me go. You erased me. You pretended I didn't exist. Her throat bobbed. We didn't. Don't. I cut in. Don't lie. Not now. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them again, she looked different. Less like my mother. More like a woman who was just tired. Your father. She hesitated, then shook her head. He's always been proud. Stubborn. He couldn't handle failure. I stiffened. You mean me? Her face twisted, like she regretted the choice of words. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? I shot back. You always acted like he was the one pulling the strings, but you let it happen. You let him kick me out. You let him. My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. You let him act like I was nothing to you. She squeezed her eyes shut. I know. I stilled. She looked up at me, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw regret in her face. Real, genuine regret. I know. Liam, she said, voice raw. And I'm sorry. I exhaled slowly. That doesn't fix anything. I know, she repeated. But it's the truth. A silence stretched between us. I should have felt something. Relief. Closure. Something. But I didn't. She studied me, like she wanted to reach for me, but wasn't sure if she had the right to. Are you happy? She asked quietly. I blinked. What? You said you're doing well, she said. But are you happy? The question caught me off guard. My first instinct was to scoff, to brush it off. But then I thought about Nate. about the life I had built for myself, the career I had worked so damn hard for. And yeah, I was happy. So I met her gaze and said, "Yeah, I am." She nodded, pressing her lips together. Good. She didn't say anything else. Neither did I. Because at the end of the day, there was nothing left to say. I walked away before she could say anything else. Not out of anger. Not because I wanted to hurt her. But because, for the first time in my life, I didn't need anything from her. I made my way back into the party, my pulse steady, my mind quiet. There was no triumphant moment, no overwhelming sense of victory. Just clarity. I wasn't here to change them. I was here to finally let go. I found my grandfather again, sitting at his table with a satisfied smirk. "That looked intense," he said, taking a sip of his drink. I let out a breath. "Yeah, it was." He nodded, like he understood exactly what I meant. And nothing," I said. "It doesn't change anything." He hummed. "Maybe not. But you feel different." I frowned. "How?" He studied me for a long moment. "Like you're finally free." That hit harder than I expected. I swallowed, looking away. "Yeah, I admit it. I think I am." The rest of the night was surprisingly normal. I talked to Sarah and Jake, caught up on years of life I had missed. Some relatives were still awkward around me, unsure how to act now that the truth was out. But others? They were genuinely happy to see me. And that was enough. By the time I left, my parents had already disappeared. Eric too. I didn't care where they went. They weren't my problem anymore. A few weeks passed before I heard from anyone. Then, one morning, I checked my email and saw it. A message from my mother. I stared at it for a long time before clicking. "Liam, I know I don't have the right to ask for your time, but I hope you'll read this." After the party, I started reading about ADHD. I wanted to understand. I should have done it years ago. I realize now that we didn't just fail you, we hurt you. I hurt you. And I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for that. But I wanted to tell you that I see it now. And I'm sorry. I've been following your career. Quietly. I know that probably doesn't mean much, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Your father. I don't know if he'll ever say the words you deserve to hear. He's stubborn. Too proud. But he knows what you've accomplished. He knows he was wrong, even if he'll never admit it. I won't ask for anything from you. You don't owe me anything. But if there's ever a day when you want to talk, I'll be here. Mom. I reread the email 3 times. My hands were steady. No anger. No sadness. Just calm. For so long, I had imagined this moment. The apology, the acknowledgement. And now that it was here, I realized I didn't need it. I wasn't waiting for her validation. I wasn't waiting for her to fix things. I had already fixed them myself. I hovered over the keyboard for a moment, debating whether to reply. Maybe just a simple okay. Maybe nothing at all. But then I closed the email and shut my laptop. Some things don't need a response. Some things are better left in the past. I got up, stretching, and walked into the kitchen where Nate was making coffee. He glanced up, eyes warm. "Everything okay?" I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "Everything's perfect."